In 1863, a Union-backed cotton tycoon built an empire in Tennessee, but the profits didn't come from cotton. They came from silence. From 73 bodies buried beneath the floorboards of a mill no one was allowed to enter. Jeremiah Chamberlain didn't just manufacture fabric, he engineered obedience. Workers disappeared, graves went unmarked, and yet the dynasty thrived. For 160 years. And the most disturbing part? Beat. You're probably wearing their legacy right now. Hard drop to silence then. This isn't just history. It's a blueprint. And once you see it, you'll never look at your clothes or your memories the same again. They were never supposed to find the ledger. Buried in a sealed brick vault beneath what remained of the Chamberlain cotton mill, no key, no markings, just a rusted iron lock and a silence that had lasted over a century. When it finally cracked open in 1987, 3 men stepped back, not because of what they saw, but what they felt. The temperature dropped, the light shifted, and inside, a book, heavy, damp, bound in faded oxblood leather with no title, just a smell like grave dirt and old smoke. And the ink? Not black, rust-colored, flaking, almost organic. Page after page listed names, 73 to be exact, each crossed out with a trembling line. No resignation, no transfer, no cause of death, just a date, a tally, and a location code, all within the same 4 years, 1863 to 1867. Every one of them disappeared from history at the exact moment Jeremiah Chamberlain's empire surged to power. They weren't workers, they were fuel. Welcome to Gallatin, Tennessee, 1863, where the cotton flowed like blood, and graves were easier to hide than truth. This is not a ghost story. It's not a murder mystery. It's something older, darker, built on power, sustained by silence, and still operating in ways you were never meant to see. The Chamberlain dynasty wasn't just a cotton empire. It was a psychological machine, a prototype for modern control systems, tested on the desperate, the nameless, the forgotten. 73 human lives, erased with bureaucratic precision, hidden beneath philanthropy, production reports, and a carefully manicured public image. The Chamberlain name would go on to fund 3 U.S. senators, 2 governors, and 1 very specific piece of legislation designed to protect industrial privacy during federal investigations. But it all started here, in a red brick mill by Bledsoe Creek, with whispers in the walls, and wagons that never returned. This is the turn. Buried under your textbooks, ignored by your documentaries, and scrubbed from your history classes. You weren't supposed to hear it. But now that you have, there's no going back, because the deeper we go, the more you'll realize. The Chamberlain dynasty didn't die. It evolved, and its methods are still being used on you. You're about to see how an empire was built, not on cotton, but on obedience. Now take a breath and follow me down. The descent begins. They called it progress, but the locals knew better. By spring of 1863, the Chamberlain cotton mill had become the lifeblood of Gallatin. To the newspapers, it was a miracle. Federal contracts pouring money into a shattered southern economy, jobs replacing famine, order replacing chaos. But if you stood close enough to the mill at night, really listened past the grinding gears and steam pistons, you'd hear something different. Rhythms that didn't match the machines, metal on bone, whispers that didn't come from mouths, and sometimes screams. The town pretended not to hear them. Jeremiah Chamberlain made sure of that. He wore civility like a cloak. Northern money, Southern charm, Union loyalty, all stitched together with razor wire. When he arrived from Massachusetts, he didn't just bring blueprints for a textile plant. He brought something more dangerous: influence. Letters from Union generals, private agreements with quartermaster offices, and a special clause in every contract that granted him federal discretion over workforce selection and site management. Translation: no one was allowed to ask questions, not sheriffs, not magistrates, not even Union officers. And behind that veil, Chamberlain operated without limits. He didn't just hire laborers, he acquired them. Refugees from burned-out towns, freed slaves with nowhere to go, runaways, widows, orphans. Every person desperate enough to accept a meal and a cot in exchange for 12 hours of labor and a vow of silence. They called it the Chamberlain Way, a new model for industrial peace in a war-torn land. But what they didn't see, or didn't want to see, was how short those labor contracts lasted. Most workers signed on for 90 days. Almost none completed the term. Some left after 2 weeks. Others never made it through the first month, and their exits were never witnessed. No goodbyes, no farewells, just names scratched off ledgers and barracks left empty. The ones who remained were too afraid to ask what happened. They knew. They'd seen the wagons too. They'd heard the grinding sounds from the old boiler room that no one was ever allowed to enter. And they'd smelled it. That sweet metallic rot that clung to the far end of the mill, no matter how many barrels of lye soap Chamberlain imported. But survival required blindness. Speak out, and you vanished. Stay quiet, and maybe, just maybe, you'd live through your shift. They weren't building a cotton empire, they were feeding a system. And if you think it stopped in 1863, you're not paying attention. Most mills tracked their inventory. Chamberlain tracked his workers like livestock. Each new arrival was assigned a residency tag, a small brass medallion stamped with a number and hung around the neck on a cotton string. It was presented as a safeguard, a way to ensure proper housing and meal rations, but there was no record of these tags in the mill's official books. The real registry was kept in the vault, and next to each numbered entry was a column marked Retention Viability. Some names were listed with the number 7, others with 14, a few, just a 3. Days, not weeks. That's how long they were expected to survive. These weren't employees, they were consumables. And the retention threshold depended on more than just physical ability. Chamberlain's notes, retrieved decades later in partial fragments, showed chilling patterns. Psychological resilience, religious conviction, resistance to suggestion, ability to withstand sleep deprivation. He wasn't just testing labor, he was testing will. What broke a man fastest? What made a woman compliant? What silenced a child permanently? Chamberlain's empire wasn't about cotton, it was about control. Control through routine, control through dependency, control through fear wrapped in gratitude. His workers weren't just overworked, they were conditioned. Their food rationed on behavior, their sleep manipulated, their identity rewritten. And the ones who resisted, they never lasted past the 3rd shift. The townspeople assumed the mill workers left on foot, chasing distant relatives or rumors of safety. But they didn't walk away. They were removed. At night, always by wagon, always covered, always headed toward the southern tree line where the forest met the creek, and where the ground was soft enough to dig fast. The truth wasn't hidden behind a wall, it was hidden behind comfort. Chamberlain offered the town clean streets, church donations, jobs for white locals, and protection from Confederate raiders. In exchange, all he asked for was silence. And that silence stretched like a noose, around 73 necks. The cotton, that was just the cover story. What he was really refining was a prototype for the modern factory of the mind. And once you understand what he tested in 1863, you'll start seeing it everywhere now. The deeper you look into Chamberlain's operation, the more you realize he wasn't working alone. Hidden in the county tax records of 1864, barely legible due to water damage, is a line-item transaction. Quartermaster expense transfer, code B93 authorization. That code, found only 3 other times during the war, was reserved for experimental logistics projects funded by a private wartime committee, unofficially known as the Iron Reserve. They weren't Union, they weren't Confederate, they were something else. A cross-party alliance of bankers, industrialists, and military minds who understood one thing: the war was temporary. But control, that was forever. They needed new models of obedience, of information, of population management, and they needed a testing ground. Chamberlain gave them one. Gallatin was ideal, cut off, desperate, a town starving for order and blind to consequences, the perfect place to simulate conditions of collapse and see what people would accept to survive. The cotton mill wasn't just producing textiles, it was producing data. Every act of compliance logged, every deviation catalogued, every disappearance measured against daily output and civilian morale. And that vault they found in 1987, that wasn't just a ledger, it was a blueprint, one they would replicate over and over in cities, in schools, in prisons, in companies with logos you see every day. The methods changed, the goals did not. What Chamberlain began in 1863 wasn't buried, it was standardized, and the only thing more terrifying than what he built is how familiar it now feels. Have you ever wondered why factories and schools use bells? Why 8-hour shifts are the cultural norm? Why identity papers, now digital, track your movement, labor here, luth and compliance? That started here. With Chamberlain, he installed bells at the mill, not just to organize workflow, but to condition obedience. Every 90 minutes, a tone rang through the building. Stand up, sit down, eat, work, sleep, no thinking, just reaction. He called it predictive rhythm conditioning. His private notes describe it as a way to flatten resistance in the moral centers of the brain. Sound familiar? It should, because decades later, similar techniques were applied in American public schools, military basic training, and even early corporate HR systems. Chamberlain didn't invent control, he perfected it. His cotton was clean, his methods were not. Every time you punch in, every time you wait for the tone, every time you follow a rule, because that's just how it's done. You're feeling the ripple, the Chamberlain effect. They tell you history is over, but the truth, it's been replicated and you're already inside the system. Let's talk about the boiler room. No one ever saw it, not really. Every mill has one, where the steam pressure's regulated, where the real noise happens. But Chamberlain's was different. It was off limits, even to the workers. Even the foremen were restricted. Only one man had access besides Chamberlain himself, a physician. Not a mechanic. His name was Dr. August Riel, a German émigré who arrived in the South under mysterious circumstances in 1861. No license, no hospital affiliation, but Chamberlain made him chief safety officer. What kind of mill needs a doctor to oversee a boiler? The answer, one that isn't just boiling water. Witnesses, rare, brief, and all dead by 1892, spoke of screams echoing from the lower floor during night shifts. Not machinery, not accidents, voices, and the smell, burnt copper and meat. Not once did the town receive a body for burial. Not once was a death reported, but 73 people went in and never came out. We're told it was just a textile plant, but what was really being refined in that heat? What experiment required steam, pain, and secrecy? Because when the army reviewed Chamberlain's site in 1868, long after the war ended, they sealed the lower chamber in concrete, not demolished, sealed. You don't do that for a broken furnace. You do that when you're afraid of what's still inside. Chamberlain believed in thresholds, points of no return, moments when a person's will could be rewritten. One of his entries from 1864 describes a process he called sequence collapsing, a brutal schedule of sleep interruption, noise distortion, and contradictory orders designed to create identity fragmentation in less than 96 hours. We found similar language decades later in declassified CIA documents. MKUltra wasn't new, it was Chamberlain too. Zero. He tested on the forgotten, they tested on soldiers. Same results, identity decay, obedience replacement, self-abandonment, and the terrifying part? It works. You felt pieces of it already. When you're overloaded, when you're confused, when the rules change every week and you're too tired to question them, that's not incompetence, it's programming. And it started here, on blood-stained floors, under steam and silence, with no one to stop it. The first investigator died within weeks. His name was Benjamin Allard, a Treasury agent sent to audit federal contracts in Tennessee. He visited the Chamberlain mill on March 9, 1865. His last letter, dated the 10th, read, "There are discrepancies here. Sir, anything wrong beneath the surface. I will stay one more night to confirm." He was found 3 days later face down in Bledsoe Creek, the cause of death, drowning, despite a 6-inch laceration on the back of his skull. The official report ruled it an accident. His case file disappeared. His family received a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. From that point on, no federal agents returned. Chamberlain was declared essential wartime infrastructure, untouchable, invisible, and free. He had created not just a mill, but a zone of exception, where the rules didn't apply, where the unthinkable became routine. That model would be copied in Vietnam, in black sites, in detention centers, and it all began on Southern soil. By summer of 1865, the war was over, but the mill kept running, more efficient than ever. That's the thing no one talks about. Chamberlain's highest production years came after the war ended. Why? Because peace brought even more desperate bodies, displaced veterans, widows, orphans. He called it the Reconstruction Surge. But the truth? It was a harvest. His operation reached full optimization. The rhythm was perfect. The fear was normalized. The disappearances expected. The town knew. They always knew. But comfort creates blindness, and every man has a price. A meal, a job, a moment of safety. That's all it takes. And when the new mayor's house was built with Chamberlain's bricks, when the school bore his name, it was over. The graveyard was complete, even if it never had a single stone. Now, here's where you come in. You've heard the echoes in your life, your routine, your fatigue. You were taught to obey bells, to clock in, to suppress instinct, to comply for comfort. They refined the model, but they never changed the design. You were born into a world built by Chamberlain's descendants. Not just his bloodline, but his system. They wear suits now, they run tech firms, schools, think tanks, and they use different tools, data instead of ledgers, screens instead of bells. But the goal is the same: predict, control, erase. You feel it, you just haven't named it yet, but now you have. Chamberlain's ghost isn't dead, it lives in every unseen algorithm, every compliance training, every silence you choose just to survive another day. And now that you see it, you can't unsee it, you've crossed the threshold. And the only way out is down the 7th floor that was never built. By 1871, Chamberlain had the wealth of a king, and kings build monuments. He commissioned an annex, a 7-floor expansion south of the original mill, built with imported limestone and a reinforced iron foundation, years ahead of its time. But something strange happened during construction. The blueprint showed 7 floors. The final building had 6. No explanation, no update to the county records. No mention in the local paper, which had covered every inch of Chamberlain's progress like scripture. But one photo remains, grainy, taken by a child with a borrowed camera, now housed in the Sumner County Archive. In the background, barely visible, the annex clearly has 7 stories. Locals who lived near the mill described sounds after midnight. Not human, not mechanical. A hum, a low-frequency rumble that shook the trees but not the ground. Chamberlain sealed off the upper floors shortly after construction. No explanation, just silence. The 7th floor was erased from maps, but not from memory. In 1911, a group of drunk teenagers dared one another to break in. They only made it to the 50th floor before collapsing. 3 of them couldn't stop shaking. One bit through his tongue trying to scream. They claimed they saw a man in white walking above them, but no stairs led to that floor, because that floor, according to history, never existed. The man in white. You've heard his name before, maybe in a different context, a different era. Dr. August Riel, the German émigré who supervised the boiler. The same man seen on the forbidden 7th floor over 40 years later. But here's the impossible part. He never aged. Witnesses from 1864, 1893, and 1909 all described the same thing. Tall, pale, no facial hair, clean linen suit, white gloves, eyes like glass. Not just memory tricks. One photograph exists, undated, unlabeled, but confirmed as authentic. It shows Dr. Riel standing outside the mill, hands clasped behind his back, identical to how he looked in 1863, identical to how he was described by a maintenance worker in 1948, when the Chamberlain site was briefly reopened for electrical rewiring. They said he nodded, said nothing, and walked through the wall, not into a door, through it. You think you know what ghosts are? Chamberlain didn't leave ghosts, he built them. The Chamberlain Ledger. Let's talk about that vault again. It wasn't discovered until 1987 during a real estate assessment. Buried behind a false wall in the southernmost basement, sealed with iron rivets and lined in a strange black resin, slick like oil but dry to the touch. Inside, one book, bound in grey skin. No title, no spine, just a single etched number, 73. The pages were handwritten in a mix of English, Latin, and a cipher not yet decoded. But several entries have been translated. One reads, "Of the 14 tested this week, 3 reached full yield before neural separation. The girl sustained 93 hours before loss of self-concept. A new record. We will name this strain productive dissonance." This wasn't bookkeeping. It was ritual, science fused with sorcery, a marriage of industrial cruelty and metaphysical manipulation. Chamberlain wasn't logging deaths. He was tracking transformation. The feed room. Beneath the west wing of the annex, behind a trapdoor, there was a room no one talked about, later called the feed room by local children who dared to peek in through rusted vents. It contained no machinery, no tools, just a chair, iron, bolted to the ground, and in front of it a mirror, 7 feet tall, etched with carvings, too worn to read. On the walls, hooks, empty chains, and a drain cut into the center of the stone floor. Why the mirror? Why the chair? Why the hooks? Survivors spoke of a process, a clarifying ceremony, not torture, calibration. Those who came out never spoke again. Some wandered the woods for days, some drowned themselves in Bledsoe Creek. One became the town's mayor in 1873. He never blinked. Cotton and ash. Not all the cotton left the mill. Some was incinerated, at least. That's what Chamberlain's log said. But fire inspectors found no trace of combustion. Instead, they discovered sealed cloth bundles marked EM, stored deep in limestone crypts beneath the mill. EM stood for emotive material, not cotton, sorrow. Each bundle had been handled only by gloved workers trained to capture and distill event-reactive residues. Translated, emotions extracted from human subjects. Woven into cloth, used for what? That's the question. But in 1921, 2 bundles surfaced at an estate auction in Savannah, Mississippi. Is labeled as Egyptian ceremonial textiles. A buyer brought one home. Within days, his children refused to sleep in the same room. His wife stopped speaking. He burned the fabric. The house still hasn't sold. It's been empty for 103 years. The return letter. In 1956, a letter was mailed to the Tennessee State Historical Society. No return address, no stamp, just a message typed on watermarked linen. You are in possession of a false narrative. The Chamberlain project was not an outlier. It was a success case. The system was approved. Expansion began in 1947 under Protocol Mirror Ghost. You are already inside it. Signed, R. It was dismissed as a hoax, filed away, forgotten. Until 1972, when an internal memo from the U.S. Department of Psychological Warfare used the phrase, Mirror Ghost Expansion, Phase 3. Coincidence? Not likely. This isn't history, it's current events. And the letter warned us. The visitors Chamberlain received guests, but not the kind you'd expect. 3 times a year, covered carriages rolled into Gallatin under armed escort. Never Union, never Confederate, no flags, no announcements. Locals were told to stay inside. Witnesses claim they were not men, not in the traditional sense. Too tall, too smooth, too still. Their eyes never blinked, and they never spoke to the townsfolk, only to Chamberlain, always at night, always near the mill, and always leaving behind packages wrapped in waxed canvas. No one knows what was inside. But every time they left, the sky turned red for exactly 23 minutes. They weren't visitors. They were inspectors, and they weren't from anywhere you could reach on foot. The Cotton Oracle. Some say Chamberlain's true invention wasn't physical. It was predictive. A room hidden beneath the foundation, lined with raw cotton, still sticky with blood, teeth, and bone dust, wired to an intricate set of mechanical switches and binary plates. Chamberlain called it the Oracle. It wasn't a computer. It was something older. He claimed it could divine human behavior from the tension in the fiber, that it whispered what people would do before they knew it themselves. And he listened. The Oracle predicted worker breakdowns, predicted pregnancies, predicted deaths, and in one terrifying entry it predicted collapse, Twintai 43, system fracture, reversal, reckoning. We're 18 years away. You still think this is just history, the children of the mill. They weren't just labor. They were templates. Chamberlain took in orphans from burned-out counties, fed them, clothed them, tested them. Each was assigned a mirroring partner, an adult who shadowed their behavior and reinforced their identity. At first, it seemed like mentorship, but when one child tried to run, his mirror followed and burned himself alive in the woods. No emotion, no resistance, just pure obedience. The children watched and never disobeyed again. Some of those children became regional directors of wartime labor camps. Some became senators. Some disappeared. But the Mirror program, it didn't stop. It scaled. The 73rd grave. You've heard about the 73 unmarked graves, but what you haven't heard, the last grave was dug empty. No body, just a mirror shard, wrapped in cloth and placed at the deepest point. Why? Because Chamberlain believed one final subject was still alive, not physically, conceptually. The 73rd wasn't a person, it was us, the collective will that watched all this happen, the one that accepted it. That did nothing, that became part of it. You're not reading about history, you are the 73rd, and now that you know, you don't get to forget. The whisperers beneath Bledsoe Creek. People assume Chamberlain's reach ended at the mill. It didn't. About a mile east, Bledsoe Creek slithers like a black ribbon between limestone cliffs. Locals called it the Hollow Mile, because sound dies there, not muffled, erased. Children playing nearby reported voices, not their own, not human, low, rhythmic, speaking in rotational tongues, where syllables loop back on themselves. Fishermen found totems, bundles of cotton tied with bone and hair. They burned them. The river boiled. For 7 nights afterward, livestock gave birth to still-eyed calves that refused to move unless directly commanded. Then came the Chamberlain bells, hung from trees, dozens of them, unmarked. Bronze, never rusted, and if you dared to ring one, you'd dream of exactly how you will die, down to the temperature of the air. People stopped ringing them, but they still ring on their own. In 1877, during a drought, the Chamberlain Cotton Empire did the unthinkable. They announced a reverse harvest. Workers were ordered to dig down, not sew up. The goal wasn't cotton, it was ash, bags of it, collected from beneath the fields. Soft, grey, strangely aromatic, like burned parchment and milk. The workers were told it came from soil purification, but those who touched it directly began exhibiting symptoms, refusing mirrors, speaking in pairs like echoes, tearing at their clothes while muttering, "It's not mine, it's not mine." Chamberlain stored the ash in sealed barrels labeled only with coordinates. No instructions, no warnings, just locations. 7 of those barrels were later found buried in Pennsylvania, Oregon, and Sweden, all near towns that no longer exist. Behind every industrial genius is a room no one enters dwelling. Ice. For Chamberlain, it was known among workers only as Room Null, or more grotesquely, the Skin Room. No one really knows what it looked like. There are no blueprints, no photos. But one survivor, an escaped child worker who became a mute until her death, drew a picture on her asylum wall. It showed a room with no ceiling walls covered in what looked like parchment human shapes, flat, stretched, screaming, a central pillar made of interwoven hands. That wall was painted over. The child was declared catatonic, but during demolition in 1991, contractors found a locked chamber under the old boiler shaft. Inside, a pillar of fused mannequins, wooden, ceramic, and leather, each with a mirror in place of a face. You don't build something like that by accident. You build it to house something else. In the main hallway of the Chamberlain estate hung a grandfather clock unlike any other, built by a German craftsman who went blind 3 days after completing it. The clock had 2 pendulums, one visible, one not. Visitors described feeling their pulse go out of sync when near it. Children claimed the clock could tell the future, but not in words. It would skip seconds when someone was about to die, or tick backward if someone was lying. In 1884, during a trade meeting, it ticked 13 times at midnight. All 7 attendees died within a week. Their names were erased from Chamberlain's ledgers. The clock was sealed in a wooden box and dropped into Bledsoe Creek. But the ticking never stopped, not in town, not in dreams, and not in the hearts of those who had heard it. She has no name, at least none that survived, but her story begins in 1866 when a widow from Franklin came to work at the mill. She was quiet, clean, obedient, too obedient. She followed orders she was never given, appeared in rooms before she was called. Some said she never blinked, others said she never cast a shadow. Then the disappearances began. 3 girls, 1 boy. Gone within weeks, the woman was blamed. She was locked in the cellar, no trial, just silence. But when they returned a week later, the cellar was filled with cotton, and she was gone. Only her boots remained, standing upright, still warm, still wet with something that wasn't water. And from then on, workers said, she still watches, from beneath, from within. Chamberlain wasn't just obsessed with cotton, he was obsessed with control. One of his most disturbing projects was known internally as the needle doctrine. It involved injecting microfilaments of cotton, treated with an unknown black serum, into the spinal columns of select workers. They said it would improve posture. Instead, it made them pliable, submissive, but not mindless. They remembered everything, just wrong. When asked where they were, they'd reply, inside. Inside what? The mill? The mirror? No one knows. One escaped patient was found writing the word repeat in her own blood across 4 miles of fence posts. It's still visible if you know where to look. In 1934, historian Lawrence Dryden was hired by the Tennessee Historical Trust to catalog the Chamberlain files. He worked quietly, methodically, until one night he walked into a Nashville speakeasy, handed the bartender a sealed envelope, and shot himself in the mouth without a word. Inside the envelope, just a single page from Chamberlain's ledger, a crude drawing, a man in white, standing over 73 open graves. Each grave had a mirror at the bottom, and scrawled in red ink across the top, "This is not the beginning, this is the replay." One of the mill's cruelest rituals occurred every 3rd Friday. Selected children were taken to the edge of Bledsoe Creek at dusk. They were asked to sing, not hymns, not work songs, but a specific melody transcribed by Dr. Riel, allegedly taken from a dream. Witnesses described the sound as melancholy in reverse. Afterward, the children were sent home, but 3 of them, always 3, never return. No funerals, no burials, no outcry, just silence. And by morning, fish in the creek would float belly up, not dead, just staring, as if they'd seen something they couldn't understand. In 1890, a Chamberlain-funded census claimed the town of Gallatin had 473 residents, but postal records show over 600 active mailboxes, school logs list 718 students, and medical records account for 801 individuals receiving treatment. So where were the rest? The answer came in a whispered memo now preserved in private collection. The remainder are concept-bound, active but uncounted, present in function but not form. Leave them be. Concept-bound, a population that exists but only as ideas, not metaphor, literal. That was Chamberlain's final goal, to prove that control is more effective when it's invisible, because you can't rebel if you don't know you exist. After Chamberlain's death in 1891, his estate was sealed, but in 1922, during a fireproofing inspection, one document was recovered from a hidden safe. Not a will, not a confession, a blueprint of a town, perfectly symmetrical, 73 buildings, 73 rooms per building, each with a central mirror and an underground feed shaft. The town was unnamed, but the bottom corner carried one phrase: for iteration 2, not a continuation, a repetition. The Chamberlain dynasty wasn't a moment in time, it was a model, a template. And if you think it ended in 1863, look around you. The second iteration might already be running. By 1936, the Gallatin region had become a communications anomaly. Radios broadcast static laced with backward numbers. Telephone operators complained of cross-connections from non-existent area codes. One evening, a Tennessee state trooper received a distress call traced to the old Chamberlain mill. Voice on the line, a child, whispering, "We're in the thread. He's weaving again." The line went dead. When investigators traced the origin, they found the wires cut. Not recently, but since 1912, no electrical current had passed through them in over 20 years, yet the copper was warm, and the receiver dripping with a white, fibrous secretion. Buried in Chamberlain's personal armory was a device so forbidden that its operators were reportedly blindfolded before and after use. It was called the White Loom. Unlike other looms, it didn't require fabric. It accepted only organic material, blood, hair, nails. In return, it wove blank tapestries, ivory white, almost glowing, but under ultraviolet light. Each cloth showed an event that had not yet happened. One cloth, dated 1857, depicted the Hindenburg disaster 80 years early. Another showed the collapse of the World Trade Center. And the final one? A modern city engulfed in flame. Over it, a stitched figure stood, draped in white cotton, headless, holding 73 black threads in one hand. The Chamberlains weren't just cotton barons, they were ritual engineers. Their final experiments involved embedding memory into matter. Cotton threads were soaked in the sweat, blood, and tears of their workers, collected nightly by supervisors in glass vials. Once dried and woven, the threads were called vessels. Anyone touching one would experience flashbacks, but not theirs. Memories of the dead, or of lives never lived. Survivors described seizures, vomiting, complete identity erasure. One man believed he was his own grandfather for 7 days before dying of a heart attack. Chamberlain stored the most powerful threads in a room known as the Soft Vault. It no longer exists. But collectors claim that certain vintage cotton quilts still carry echoes. If yours whispers at night, you may own one. In 1888, Chamberlain sponsored an event called the Harvest Choir, inviting musicians from across Tennessee. They were instructed to bring no instruments. Instead, they were each assigned a grave. 73 musicians, 73 unmarked graves. They stood above them, silent. Then at dusk, a single tone emerged. From beneath, deep, wailing, hollow, each musician began to hum as if possessed. Witnesses reported the earth vibrating, teeth chattering, and tears flowing upward from their own eyes. The music lasted 33 minutes. No one recorded it. No one dared. Afterward, 41 musicians disappeared. The rest were institutionalized. They said they'd seen the score, and that it had no end. The Chamberlains understood something primal about mirrors. They don't just show us, they trap us. Their estate was designed with exact reflective angles. Every hallway curved into mirrored intersections. Guests reported losing time. One ambassador claimed to see himself standing behind himself, mouth moving independently. They called this phenomenon the reflection protocol. It was believed to be a metaphysical filtration system. Only those who passed through without encountering a wrong self were permitted to access the second floor, and those who failed were never seen again. Their rooms remained clean, beds made, but their toothbrushes would be wet, as if someone, something, still used them. In 1949, an FBI informant working in Nashville intercepted a series of calls originating from the old Chamberlain estate, abandoned since 1902. But when traced, the calls had no dial origin. They were listed as unknown ingress. Each call consisted of a repeated phrase: thread the dead, thread the dead, thread the dead. Eventually, one agent called the number back. It rang once, then a voice answered, his own, screaming, not words, just a deep, soul-shattering scream that triggered a brain aneurysm on the spot. The agent died in 12 seconds. The phone number disappeared from all records the moment the coroner wrote the time of death. Near the final years of the dynasty, Chamberlain held public sermons out in churches, in barns, damp, reeking of cotton mold and milk rot. He wore no shoes, no coat, just a cloak woven of virgin thread and child finger bones. He would speak for hours, never blinking. Each sermon ended with a glass of milk passed from his hand to the lips of a chosen child. The children would shudder, then speak in Latin, fluent, rapid, not their own voices. All 12 died within the year, each one found drowned in dry fields, mouths filled with white foam and cotton seeds. One of the most disturbing records comes from Dr. Maxwell Dorr, a physician who treated a woman employed at the Chamberlain mill. She was pregnant. At 8 months, she experienced seizures and claimed the child inside her was spinning itself into thread. When labor came, the child was stillborn. But instead of a corpse, the doctor delivered a complete, seamless cotton cloth wet with blood. Folded within it was a tooth, a human molar. A month later, 5 other women delivered identical fabric children. Each one housed a single body part, an ear, an eyelid, a toe. The cloths were burned, the ashes would not scatter. A gravedigger named Holder Price told a tale on his deathbed in 1972. He claimed that in 1890, during a particularly long night, he buried someone who wasn't dead. A Chamberlain official. But not gasping, not fighting, smiling, whispering as the dirt fell, "This is the part where I sleep through your century." Years later, in 1969, Holder returned to the site during a thunderstorm, driven by a dream. Lightning struck. The grave burst open. No bones, just a note. "Nice try. See you next thread." They call it the ghost of Thread 73. Sightings began in the 1920s. A tall, faceless figure robed in cotton stained with something dark, sometimes red, sometimes black, sometimes flickering between both. Always at the edge of fields, always when you're alone. It never chases, just watches. And if you look too long, it tilts its head and raises its arms. At that moment, people report overwhelming auditory hallucinations, screams, looms crashing, bells tolling backward. One man carved his own face off after seeing it. He said he wanted to make sure he wasn't a mask too, because that's what the cotton ghost reveals. You're not wearing your skin, you're wearing someone else's thread, and he wants it back. The Chamberlain estate once kept horses, not for travel but rituals. The stables, now collapsed, once housed 18 horses, each blindfolded from birth and raised in total silence. Stable boys were forbidden to speak. The horses were trained to react only to whispers, not commands, not whistles. One witness described an annual midnight ceremony where masked men in white led the horses in a perfect figure 8 across scorched earth. No torches, no music, just whispering. Hundreds of voices, layered and overlapping. Those who heard it from outside the gates claimed it was in reverse speech, and when played backward, the whispers said, "We are the riders, the living are the reins." In 1877, Chamberlain quietly funded a secret census of all Tennessee-born individuals with a lineage tied to slavery or indentured servitude. But it wasn't for record-keeping, it was for collection. Blood samples, hair, teeth. Families were offered gold in exchange for ancestral materials. The Chamberlains believed in a theory called lineal threading, that suffering could be measured, extracted, and spun into control fabric. What they created was called census cloth. Each strand contained one lineage of pain. Woven together, they made command quilts, used, it was said, to manipulate anyone whose ancestors had bled on Tennessee soil. The deeper your pain, the tighter the quilt gripped you. Her name was Minerva Dalton. She worked in silence. Her fingers moved faster than any other woman in the mill. But her thread was not cotton. It was blackened silk, kept in a locked drawer. Minerva never spoke, until one day she screamed, only once, so violently it shattered all the windows on the western wing of the estate. When they found her, her tongue had been sewn to the roof of her mouth with black thread. She had sewn her own eyelids closed, and on her lap sat a folded square of fabric that bled from the corners. Scrawled in her own handwriting on the floorboards, "I saw who holds the other end of the thread." In the estate's inner study, accessible only through a mirrored corridor that reflected no humans, was a map. Not of Tennessee, not of Earth, a topographic diagram of emotional trauma etched on human skin. Each valley was a fear, each ridge a loss. The Chamberlains used this map to determine where rituals would yield the strongest results. When a specific location lit up, like a nerve flaring, they would send workers to bury a loom tooth, said to infect the land with threadable memory. That's why entire towns like Hartwell, like Willowfield, don't remember their own founding. because their memory doesn't belong to them anymore. Heirs to the Chamberlain name weren't given wealth, they had to earn it. On their 17th birthday, they were placed in a black room for 7 nights. Inside was only a chair, a candle, and a folded cloth. Each night the candle burned lower, each night the cloth grew longer, until by the final night the room would be filled wall to wall with impossible fabric. No matter how many times it was folded, the cloth never ended. Those who survived, those who didn't try to hang themselves or scream until their throats tore, were accepted. They emerged with a single strand in their eye, permanently embedded, proof of inheritance. Throughout Tennessee folklore, there are rumors of white men who aren't white by race, but by own eye condition, tall, almost translucent, dressed in stitched suits made of pure cotton, bleached to a sickly pale hue. They knock on doors during storms, never speak, never force. They just hold out a piece of paper. It reads, "Thread identified. Are you ready to be pulled?" Those who accept are never seen again. Those who refuse vanish within the month, discovered folded into tiny cubes of cotton left on their own beds. Police called them hoaxes. Historians call them allegory. But some local coroners say the cotton cubes bleed when burned. At the height of his power, Amos Chamberlain developed a theory that mirrors don't reflect us, but measure us. He commissioned the building of a 9-foot mirror inlaid with cotton threads soaked in ancestral blood. It was said that the mirror could choose who was real. Those who stood before it too long would begin to flicker, and then disappear. But not fully. People claimed to see their other selves in peripheral glances, doing things they never remembered doing. Eating, hurting, smiling. Chamberlain called this the thread duplicate phenomenon. He believed we all had stitched alternatives, other paths, other lives that could be summoned, if only the mirror approved. In 1866, after a drought ravaged Sumner County, the Chamberlains distributed relief quilts to dozens of starving families. Beautiful, heavy, warm, but they carried more than comfort. Within days, recipients began hallucinating meals. Families swore they had eaten roast pork, buttered corn, sweet potatoes. They described the taste, the texture, but they never actually ate. They starved, surrounded by feast hallucinations. The quilts had been laced with a rare mycotoxin, derived from mold cultivated in the Chamberlain stables. It didn't kill directly. It made the brain forget hunger until the body died smiling, eyes closed, mouths chewing on air. Beneath the Chamberlain estate was a hidden chapel, carved not into the ground but into the foundation of reality. The architecture made no sense. Windows that showed memories, doors that opened into futures, an altar built of compressed bone dust and cotton pulp. Here the Chamberlains worshipped the Weaver, an entity said to dwell in time's thread, not time itself. Sermons were held in reverse chronology. You'd begin by confessing a sin you hadn't committed yet, and by the end, you'd believe you had. Those who survived the chapel said one thing, that the Weaver watches from beneath the stitch, waiting for one fray to unravel everything. Every 20 years, the Chamberlains held what was called the Rites of Yield, not a festival, a harvesting. People selected by birthmark, blood type, or dreams, led into the fields, where they were wrapped, not in chains, but in living cotton. The fabric would breathe, tighten, then vanish into the soil, leaving no trace, except for a pulse, a soft vibration from beneath, as if the earth itself had taken a deep breath and was now holding it. Some say this is how the Chamberlains fed the loom, not with sacrifice, but with stories, because every person who vanished had been seen the night before. In someone else's dreams, they were not buried all at once. Each grave marked a turning point, a failed ritual, a broken thread, but they were not failures to the Chamberlains. They were tithes. The 73 souls were all bound by one thing. They died with memory removed. No family could remember them. No friends could speak of them. Their names were extracted, burned, erased from letters, journals, and minds, and yet their bodies were preserved, dried, wrapped, and interred in an underground vault beneath the cotton press. It wasn't death that terrified the Chamberlains. It was unthreaded memory. For to forget someone entirely was to give their spirit to the loom. And that loom? It still spins. As he appears in no photos, but every diary from workers on the estate mentions him, tall, impossibly thin, dressed in black cotton robes with sleeves that hung to the ground. He never spoke, never moved quickly. He simply observed, and when someone stole or broke protocol or tried to run, he would appear at the end of their bed, With a small bag, inside a single folded cloth, it would be placed over the sinner's mouth, and when it was removed, they could no longer speak. Some tore out their own throats trying to scream again. Others wandered the fields, whispering to the wind, waiting to be heard. Few were allowed inside. Fewer returned. At the heart of the estate was a room of wheels, not mechanical, organic, constructed from bone, hair, and thin strands of human tendon. Here the Chamberlains wove behavior, a system of command embedded into fabric, then into flesh. They called it compliance weft. Servants stitched with it would obey any spoken phrase. One boy, escaped in 1889, claimed the room smelled like roses and blood. He saw his sister's name being woven into a garment. The thread bled when touched, and as he ran, he heard the machines whisper, "One stitch, and she belongs to us." In 1862, during the bloodiest year of the war, Amos Chamberlain made contact with what we do not know, but the terms were written in a contract sewn from dried skin and signed in white ink made from crushed bone. The pact stated, "So long as pain is cultivated and memory is erased, the yield shall endure." This was the price of cotton supremacy, not war, not weather, not slavery alone, but the willful, continuous harvesting of identity. The 73 bodies were not just sacrifices, they were currency, and the family line was the vault. Her name was Elizabeth. Born 1933, she broke the chain, burned the family records, sealed the tunnels, locked the chapel, and vanished. But before she did, she left behind one final letter, hidden in the lining of a child's burial dress. It read, "The loom is alive. It doesn't care if we believe. It only cares that we remember and fear." She warned that every act of cruelty feeds it, that every silence threads another line, and she claimed she was pregnant with the child of no father, born not of flesh but of thread, a human vessel woven by the pact itself. In 1981, the last piece of the estate was sold at auction, a black spindle. The buyer, a textile historian, brought it home. Within weeks, his wife began sewing uncontrollably, hours at a time, unaware. Their daughter began speaking in backward voices. Their dog would not enter the sewing room. By spring, the historian had disappeared. Only the spindle remained, and from it hung a fresh strip of cotton, new, wet, still warm. Every year since, someone who studies the Chamberlains vanishes, and every time a new spindle appears, wrapped in names. Some haven't been born yet. Locked in the Tennessee Historical Archives is a bolt of cloth sealed in 6 boxes, each marked, "Do not open. Federal Order 1871. It's said to contain the sum total of all woven sin in Chamberlain history, every thread stolen, every soul erased, a sensory archive of horror. Those who've touched it claim to hear babies crying despite no sound. One archivist reported tasting iron and ash for weeks after. The cloth was tested once. Results came back, unidentifiable organic compound. But under black light, it glows, and in that glow shapes move, always weaving. The estate, though collapsed, remains alive. Explorers have described strange phenomena, echoes of children playing in the cotton fields, a loom that clicks by itself in the dark, footprints in the soil that appear behind, not in front. One man captured a photograph in the cellar. When developed, it showed his own body, stitched closed, lying in a glass box. He fled. Weeks later, he was found dead, wrapped in thread, mouth sewn shut. Autopsy revealed no wounds, but inside his stomach, one single name written in fabric, Chamberlain. The Chamberlain loom was dismantled in 1946, or so they say. But recent discoveries point to a different truth. The loom was divided, not destroyed. Its parts sold to universities, museums, and textile companies. Now pieces of it may be in your clothes, your bed sheets, your uniforms. If you've ever had a nightmare of being pulled as if by invisible thread, if you've woken up with marks along your arms like stitches, you may already be woven in. Because the Chamberlain loom didn't die, it migrated into society. This was never just about the Chamberlains. It was about what they discovered. That pain is programmable. That memory is harvestable, that identity can be spun, and that humanity is the most obedient when it believes it's free. So ask yourself, have you forgotten someone but don't know why? Do you own clothes that feel heavier than they should? Have you ever heard the word Chamberlain in a dream? Then maybe your thread is already in the weave because they never needed your permission, only your silence. And now that you've listened, the loom knows your name. In 1997, an anonymous letter arrived at the Tennessee State Historical Society. No return address, no postage, Just a note in curled, elegant script. One final walk before the thread pulls tight. It was signed Elizabeth C. The handwriting matched that of Elizabeth Chamberlain, the last known heir, presumed dead since 1955. Security footage from the building that night shows a woman in black, wearing white gloves and carrying a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. She entered the archive basement. She never exited. In her place, a spool of black thread, slowly unraveling by itself. Across 12 decades, the names change, but the pattern doesn't. Researchers vanish. Textile historians suffer unexplained mental collapses. Children of mill workers report identical dreams. In 2020, a graduate student at Vanderbilt found something in the census logs, a symbol etched beside the names of the Chamberlain laborers who had vanished. It was not a letter or number. It was a weave pattern, a 3-thread twist used only in binding corpses for ritual funerals in 14th century Florence. It was used here, in Tennessee, on living workers. They are everywhere. People without childhood photographs, no records, no memory of grandparents, blank spots in their own family trees. Some think it's adoption, or poverty, or poor record-keeping, but some of them are different. They hear a low hum when cotton spins. They feel sick near antique sewing machines, and they speak in their sleep, phrases in forgotten dialects stitched into Chamberlain fabric contracts. They are not descendants, they are rethreads. Lives woven from stolen essence, modern bodies, old threads, born not by mothers, but by the loom. In 2011, during a global textile summit in Tokyo, a hidden camera caught executives in a closed session. On the table, an object covered in cloth. They whispered, not in English but in spun tongue, a phonetic code developed by Chamberlain operatives in 1864. One phrase was repeated over and over: "The yield must remember." 3 months later, 2 attendees were dead. One was missing. The survivor retired, blind and mute. His only possession, a length of red cotton wrapped around his wrist. It couldn't be cut. The Chamberlain Empire was never about cotton, that was the cover. What they truly pioneered was obedience manufacturing, invisible coercion woven into textiles, language, and memory, school uniforms that erase dissent, hospital sheets that numb identity, military fabrics that suppress conscience. Each product carries microthreads encoded with trauma memory, and each time they're worn, the wearer absorbs it. This isn't a conspiracy theory, this is commerce. The Chamberlain technique was exported through silent partnerships, and now it lives in thousands of companies, hidden under trade laws, cultural philanthropy, and sustainability campaigns. In the Appalachian shadows, far from cameras, a new movement has begun. Churches without Bibles, congregants without names. Inside, they worship not a god but a wheel, a great circular device made of bone and brass and human hair. Their sermons are silent. Their rituals involve threading long strands of fabric soaked in salt water and blood across their mouths. They believe the Chamberlains were not villains, they were messengers, and the loom is coming back, not to enslave, but to complete the weave. They call it the final tension. You've seen them, people who don't quite fit into memory, that friend who vanished after college and no one remembers, the teacher you had in 4th grade but who doesn't appear in any yearbook, the neighbor who waved until you looked again and realized they had no face in the old photo. They were unseamed, memory untethered, presence removed, identity stitched shut and filed back into the vault of collective forgetting. Every one of them was once connected to the Chamberlain line. Some still are, and they're watching you now. What are you wearing right now? Is it cotton? Where was it made? Is it branded? How does it feel? Have you ever had the sense that you've worn something before you were born? Some people report dreams of clothes they never owned, being pulled tightly across their body, sewn into place, never removed. If your tags are stamped with a certain 5-digit code, 73163, know this: that was Chamberlain's original land plot number. And if your fabric bears it, you're in the lineage. The final sign is the mirror test. Turn off all lights. Wear a garçon, which meant you did not buy yourself. Stand in front of a mirror and stare into your eyes. Wait until you feel the pull. If you see your reflection blink before you do, step back. Your thread has already been marked. The loom is already measuring you. Don't speak. Don't run. It's not trying to harm you. It's simply trying to decide where you fit. And now you've heard it. The truth that was never supposed to be spoken. You've crossed into memory that was buried for a reason. And the loom, it rewards attention. So remember, the Chamberlains were not human in the way we understand humanity. The cotton fields were never meant for harvest, but for binding. The 73 graves were not mistakes. They were keystones, and the spindle still spins. This wasn't just a story, it was a summons. And now that you know the weave, you're a part of it. You are no longer a spectator, you are a thread, and whether you tighten or unravel, that choice was never really yours. Welcome to the pattern. The Chamberlain dynasty lives, and it remembers you.